Today's subjects, as you know, are two homes recently added to the National Register of Historic Places, and we have two speakers today. One is John Marshall, who needs no introduction. He's our program chair, and John is also a prolific local historian, and John has now literally written the book on local history. His History Next Door series that you can find on our website has been compiled into a book, which you can find at the local history section of the library, and there's a link on our website too. And then John has also added to some of those stories about some of the great local homes in the area. Our other speaker is Marilyn Touchot, who I just introduced a little bit ago. She's the owner of the Elijah Bull House, also known as Old Oak. I've been in the home and was given a tour by Marilyn. It's a beautiful and amazing home with a long history, so it's really an incredible place. Marilyn is involved in a number of organizations that are involved with preservation and history. Obviously, she spent a lot of time working on her own home and getting the designation. She's been a founding board member of the Historical Society, also the Charles Freer House, Belle Isle Conservancy, Historical Society of Michigan, National Association of Olmsted Parks, Victorian Society in America, Friends of Belle Isle, and the Piety Hill Restoration Society. So Marilyn has an extensive involvement in a lot of different organizations. So I'm going to have John Marshall come up now and get the program started. Thank you very much, John, for all you do. We really appreciate it.
Just so you don't get confused, the book that I had written is not published, it's printed, and it's bound, and there is a copy in the local history section. It's also available online through a PDF you can look at from the library's website on your own computer. Look through it. Just about 56 different homes in the area that I've written about over the past several years. Anyway, we saw many of you probably saw it too, not too long ago, about just a little over a month ago. The Eagle had an article that you all get mailed to your home about the two new homes have been added to the National Register of Historic Places in this area. Those are the two homes we're going to address today. But before that, I would like to tell you a little bit about what the National Register of Historic Places is. I've often been asked the question, and people have always wondered sometimes whether they can get their house on the National Register and whether it would qualify. So I'll give you a few things about that. Then I'll let Marilyn talk about the Bull House, her house. And with what time is left, I'll tell you about the Walter Briggs estate, a little bit about it, because I talked a long time about it 8 years ago here. And I'll tell you more of that about later. Anyway, the National Register of Historic Places was part of the National Park Service programs under the Department of Interior, and they began this program in 1960. The properties must be typically at least 50 years old, which makes me kind of funny because the house I live in for the last 48 years is itself 50 years. I would never consider it a historic home, but anyway, that's one of their criteria. It should have some kind of historic significance, and it should be I decided to look up how many there are in the area. We talked about two new ones. Well, since 1960 in the United States, in the country, there are 96,000 sites, locations on this historic registry of historic places. In our county, in Michigan, there are 2,000 about, and in Oakland County, there are 83, and in the Birmingham, Bloomfield area, in addition to these two, there are 12 others. So it's a total of 14 places. I won't call them homes, because some things on the register aren't actually homes. So it's a fairly robust collection of places. Generally, to make it into the registry, you'd have to have some sort of a historical significance. You need to be some historic events need to have occurred in it. It needs to be have historic personages that have lived there, or it has some sort of architectural or design or engineering significance. The way to go about getting your, and there are a number of homes in this area that could qualify, in my opinion, to be on the registry. It just takes a bit of work, quite a bit of work, actually. You would pull up the things that go into your application, basically, are a statement of its historic significance, the assessor's data, tax records, historic maps, photographs of the house, old photographs if possible, plus new ones, floor plans of the house, preservation activities that have been taken, and often a list of the owners that have lived there. The way you go about doing it is you pull up an application on the internet from the National Register of Historic Places. Actually, I believe you go to the what's called SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, and you get it because each state has its own office that communicates with the National Registry. You gather the data that you're going to use. You put up you submit your documentation. Now, I have in italics up there underneath the obtaining the application that sometimes people have done this themselves. You know, they've done their own application, have been successful at it. And some of them in our area have done that. Others, they feel it's too daunting of a task, so they'll hire a preservationist to do the work to assist them. And the two that we're talking about today did have assistance of some professional people. Once the application is put together, it's submitted to SHPO, they call it, State Historic Preservation Office in Lansing. They often turn it around 2 or 3 times to make, they make suggestions, corrections, and so forth. They turn it in, and when they're happy with it, to the National Park Service, and there may be some iterations there too, and all in all, this thing may take a year or a year and a half to get done. So it's not something you just fill out an application and set it in and get it immediately. It's a lot of work goes into doing it. Now, who's in the National Register of Historic Places now in this area, in Birmingham, Bloomfield area? I'll go through these real quickly. There are about 14 of them. The Hunter House in Birmingham. You see the whole Cranbrook community is in there. The Affleck House, a Frank Lloyd Wright home on Woodward Avenue. The train station, Birmingham train station, is in there. You see an old picture and a new picture of that. There's a home that is off of Squirrel Road, just south of South Boulevard on Foxwood Drive. It's an old 1800s home, probably about the age of Maryland's home. That was submitted by members of our historical society years ago. The daughter actually filled out the application and submitted it herself and made it to the registry. Another Frank Lloyd Wright house, the Smith House on Pond Valley off of Lone Pine Road. Then there's something that's not a house. There's something that doesn't exist anymore. That is the bridge we call the Trowbridge Road Bridge that was built in the 1930s across the railroad tracks coming out of the subdivision there right near the Sacred Heart Academy. As you can see in the upper corner, there was demolished last year, but it's still in the register. There's another bridge over the railroad tracks. That's by Derby Middle School. I don't know why that one made it. I could tell why the first one made it with its beautiful 7 arches and so forth, but I'm never quite sure why this one at Derby made the registry. But it's in there. Built at the same time when the railroad tracks were moved off of Woodward. This is a home on Chesterfield called the Endicott House. There's one of our members' houses, Dwight Diener and who? Katie Kyle. Yeah. They're not here today, but they submitted their own application. They didn't need any help. They did it all by themselves. It's on Tiverton, Katie Kyle. Here's another person that submitted their own house on Eaton Cross in the Trowbridge Farms subdivision. Nancy Bacon submitted hers and got it on the registry. And then there's another one, fairly new one here, a brand new house, but it's barely 50 years old. Yamasaki, the architect's home, very near the Briggs Estate. Actually, it's across the little lake from the Briggs Estate. So those are some that are on there. in this area. We're going to talk about the two new ones that were just added, and as I say, the one on Wing Lake Road and the Briggs Estate. And with that, we'll let Marilyn tell you about her house, which she just got approved for a month or two ago. Okay, Marilyn?
Well, hi, I'm Marilyn Tusho, and this is Old Oak. This is the home we've lived in for 48 years. And I have to tell you, John, when we moved here, we got the house on the Michigan Register of Historic Places. We moved here, we bought the house in 1975 and moved the year of the bicentennial in 1976. And I was really so gung-ho and everything, and I went to find out how we could get it on the National Register. Well, we were told first you had to put it on the Michigan Register of Historic Places. So I went, got all the information that was necessary to fill out, and okay, we were accepted. We were on the National Michigan Register of Historic Places in 1976. Then I wanted to get us on the National Register. Well, it wasn't quite, at that time it was a lot easier than what you just saw. But raising a family of 5 children and having an old house to deal with is quite daunting, and somehow time got away from me. So by the time the children left and by the time I decided it was time to put us on the National Register, I went and obtained the forms and looked at it. Well, what had originally been almost, or just maybe 2 or 3 sheets to fill out became a sheaf of papers. It was amazing. So that is when I realized that I might need to have some professional help. And John alluded to this now, that because it has become so complex and the requirements to get on the National Register have changed and become much more complex, that it is advisable, if one can, to get a consultant to help you gather the data that is necessary and also to put it into the correct form, because the professional will know exactly what the government wants, what the local historic preservation officer wants, and will be able to tailor the information to fit that. And then you go through the submission process, and then the waiting process. And so we came out, and so we're very happy to have just received the national standing for us. And people have said to us, don't put your house on the National Register. I'm talking to you like you're sitting in my living room and you're my close friends. Okay, people have said, don't put your house on the National Register. You will never be able to sell your house. And I said, well, yes, I will. Someone will love this house. You know, why do you say that? Well, people think that somehow the National Register will have such strict rules and regulations that you'll never be able to do anything. And that's an erroneous assumption. So if any of you are thinking about doing putting your home on the National Register, don't be put off by that. And that's not so. There will be people who will love your home, who will want to live in a home, a historic home. This is a happy house. And I will show you some things that I found out from past owners of the house who have given me things and told me what a happy house this was. It was just by chance that I found this house. We had been living downtown in Lafayette Park with the 5 children and going and loving it, but things occurred where we needed a larger home. And my husband said to me one day, Mare, you got to go find a home, maybe out in Birmingham, or I don't know, find a realtor. So the next morning I went out and found a realtor over at Brook Company. And anyway, I told her that I wanted a home, an old home. I had been very active in the Victorian Society in America, and I had thought, well, a Victorian home would be really wonderful. However, I found out, and I did know, that there were very few Victorian homes left in Birmingham, Bloomfield area. In any case, the realtor with whom I spoke on Monday called me back on Thursday and said, I found a house for you. And it's not on the national, and it's not on the multi-list yet. But if it goes, it will go in the morning, and it's all over. But I think it fits your family. I called my husband and told him that we needed to see it. He said, I'd go look at it and see. But Mayor, that's the oldest pitch in the real estate. Tell them that someone else is looking at the house, and they go. Anyway, I went and I looked, and it was very nice, and I called him back. I said, yeah, really, Jerry, you got to come see it. Anyway, he did come see it, and the rest is history, because that afternoon, we were told that if you're interested in the house, you have to put some money down. I want you to know I had $20 in my wallet, and I didn't have a checkbook with me. However, the $20 secured it till the next morning, and so we became the owners of Old Oak. Now, Old Oak did not look exactly like this when we bought it. I'd like to do later on in the year, perhaps, a before and an after, because I want to show you how wonderful the house is now. But over the years, people have lived in the house and loved the house, but they haven't understood the house. And a lot of the original fabric of the house has been covered. And when I went into the house, I have to tell you also, I was involved in some historic preservation projects in Detroit, and I had some ideas about historic preservation. When I actually really looked at the house, after we had already put that money down, I realized that so much of the house was covered. And so I want to show you now what we have done, and then as we go along, I'm very quickly going to go through this, but I want to show you what the house is pretty much like now, and later when we get the marker put up, we want to have a party. We want to do something, and I'd love to show you the before and the after and let you see some of the things. The Bull family or Elisha Bull bought the property from Austin Wing, and the house is located on Wing Lake Road. And that was in the 1820s, late in the 1820s. And the first notification documentation that I could find about ownership is in 1830, that's when Elisha Bull, and they called him Deacon Elisha Bull, and I'll tell you why that's when he purchased the house. Now, the house, if you've been involved in any kind of building recently, you know you don't build a house quickly. But in 1830, when the house was built, I can only imagine what the time frame was when the house was actually constructed. The house was built in many different at many different times, and so I'm going to try to show you that right now. It's called Old Oak because of the oak tree, and I believe the house was sited here because of the oak tree, because the oak tree was a working tree. A working tree? People have asked me, what are you talking about? Well, in the 1830s, a sturdy tree was very necessary because they had huge cauldrons that they needed at hog butchering time or in making candles and such. You had to have a place that had a strong enough branch and that where you could have a fire underneath it, and Old Oak qualified. And it also was right near the lake. So there was a beautiful vista, and it's on a little crest of a hill, a very slight hill. It was a beautiful site. It is a beautiful site. So, but that's the beginnings. Okay. And this is just a map to show you where the Elisha Bull house is. And here, I don't know. I'm not sure that the map shows very well. All right. Now, in Bloomfield Blossoms, it says that not very much of the old house remains. Wrong. Much of the old house does remain. This is the original cooking fireplace. This is where, when the state archaeologists came to visit the house, they said that there was only 2 other homes in Michigan. One was the home in Port Huron, Thomas Edison's boyhood home, and that on Mackinac Island there's a home. Why is it different? Because it is the old-fashioned fireplace, and there is a bake oven right to the, it would be to our right. There is a bake oven there. The original door is to the very left, and it has the original windows. The windows in Old Oak are 12 over 12, and they are and many of them have the original glass in them with the bubbles and all the irregularities. And so the 12 over 12, we have the cooking fireplace, and then when Elisha Bull needed to enlarge the house, he built up and over. The original house was built of stone. Was built of stone. And people wonder why an emergency shelter or why an original house in Oakland County was built of stone. Well, I did find that out from a friend of mine who later on told me that her maiden name was Bull. And so that's another long story. But in any case, the reason why Elisha Bull built the house out of stone, the original house out of stone, is he came from a family of stone masons in Orange County, New York. And Austin Wing, here's another interesting aside. This house is important because it's the beginning of the historic part of Oakland County, of the pioneers coming to making their first appearance here in Michigan. People were afraid to go to Michigan. They had heard that there was malaria here. They had heard there were swamps. People didn't want to come here. But here was one of the very first pioneers. And it makes me wonder, Austin Wing must have gone to Orange County, and he must have talked to a group of young men and women, but he must have talked to someone, because when I show you the map of the original settlement, of the original homes here in Oakland County and right here in Bloomfield Township, you will see the names of these were the original people who came from Orange County, New York. So how could all of these young people have come? I think Austin Wing went and really pitched it. Also, the other thing that helped was that the Erie Canal had just opened, and so they could bring some of their possessions and everything and load it onto the boat, on the barges, and then get quite close to Michigan. And that was a big help, and I think that also was important in the early settlement of Oakland County. This is why, and I think this is a very important thing to remember. Okay. By the way, the fireplace and bake oven still work. And when we moved into the house, we wanted to have fires in the fireplace and everything, but I was afraid to do anything till we had the chimneys looked at, until I found out, was it safe? Well, it's a good thing we didn't, okay, because we found out that the chimneys over the years had eroded. The layers of bricks had come down and were very close to the roof line. And so before we could use the fireplace, a new roof was important. And also in the, well, we'll get there, but in the attic, when I went up there to the attic, I could see the original shingles on the roof were shake shingles, highly combustible, and over it were several layers of more modern roofing materials at the time. Before we could do anything else, we had to have the chimneys rebuilt, but I had to make sure that they were in the correct, I wanted to make sure that architecturally correct and also very safe. So that was very important. And the bake oven also is still missing its original wooden door. I need to find a good woodworker or carpenter, because I'd love to put a little door on the bake oven and simulate the original one. But anyway, this is okay. And so there's the 12/12 panes that are throughout the house, with the original bubble glass. Although the glass is having problems because people in the neighborhood don't understand that if they're constructing a large home and have large vehicles in and out, and if they pick up heavy boulders out of the ground and drop them from 20 feet into the bed of a truck, that it will cause some problems with other homes nearby. So whether it's a new home, a brand new home, or whether it's an 1830s home, some of the glass didn't care for that shaking and didn't think it was so cool. So it has caused some havoc. But that's part of owning an old house. Okay. Here's a picture of Louise Gillette's grandchildren who were playing in the bake oven, hide and seek in the bake oven. I can't imagine about that. It's a very small place. I don't think. All right. The ownership history. Well, you can see it was Elisha Bull, the Durkees, the Thurbers, Louise and John Gillette, Nancy Chickering, and us. I want to show you something that is on the wall downstairs at the lower level of those stairs that showed going up. Henry Ford visited the house, thought it was very lovely, and wanted to make some suggestions. He thought that electrical lighting and all, and switches on the wall were really terrible, and that this was something that had to be avoided at all costs. So there is the panel on the left closed, and that's it open. And those are for the 3 zones in the lower level. And you were supposed to cover it with wallpaper. Okay. When we bought the house, the original, as I mentioned, the original house hadn't been appreciated people loved it, but they didn't know what to do with it. So if there was a little crack or something, they covered it. The living room was covered with grass cloth. The windows in the kitchen, all of the beautiful woodwork were painted over layers of white paint. There was thick carpeting on covering the beautiful floors. There were so many things that people thought they were doing to enhance the value of the house or to bring it into the correct time frame. But what they were doing was kind of not understanding the house. And so what we have tried to do is to bring it back. Now, I'm going to show you real quickly some other pictures, but I think I've gone past my time limit here. So, and then if anyone has questions, I would be happy to answer them afterwards. Okay, these are pictures. These are pictures of Old Oak now, and here shows the stone. That was the original stone. That was Elisha and Melinda are in the Franklin Cemetery, by the way. Okay, let's go here. Right. The stone school was built by Elisha Bull. He was the stonemason, and so he donated the property and the stone. Okay. Okay. Under the front porch, in the very bottom picture there, you can see there is a man down there. Okay, he is excavating the cistern. We had the cistern under the front porch, which still exists and is still viable. And I'll tell you something about that. People have asked us, well, Deacon Bull was a member of the First Presbyterian Church here in Oakland County. And the Presbyterians were very concerned with what was happening, with President Lincoln and with with slavery. And we have been asked many times, do you think that this house was in any way part of the railway, the underground railway? Yeah. And I don't know that it was, and I have never found any documentation, but I can tell you that cistern, it is dry now, and it's under the front porch, under the wooden front porch. That would be a very interesting and not very well noticed place to harbor someone if in fact one wanted to do something like that. So there are many mysteries still to the house, but there is Rich Stamps, Dr. Richard Stamps from Oakland University is down in the well, and so he is in the cistern. But then we have what looks like a playhouse on our grounds. It was not a playhouse originally. That was the well house, and the well also has been excavated. And we were looking for artifacts and things, and we found bottles and we found some things, but all of that's been excavated. But the children played in the playhouse, and there is a story that the Chickerings had a horse, or the children had a horse, and the horse was housed in the playhouse. And one day the horse fell into the well, and and they couldn't get the horse out, so they had to call. This must have been in the late 30s, maybe 40s. They had to call a tow truck to come with a sling to get underneath the horse. I guess it was a pony, but they had to get something to get him out. So Brownie was rescued and went on to live a happy life. But anyway, the playhouse that we have restored also is visible. So. Okay, now in the attic, this is not a very good slide, but in the attic, on the wall, the boys lived in the attic, and that was, on the right-hand side is our pictures from an old newspaper, and it shows the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and then it shows the different presidents up through Jackson. And Bill Bull was the eldest son, and you see he put his name on over the pictures there. And on the left-hand side was something that I had not intended to have in this, but is just showing the width of the original boards, because someone came in and said, oh, this couldn't possibly be the original. Well, Richard Stamps, who is the state archaeologist, did come up and look at it, and he said, absolutely it was. There are no trees that grow today that would have been able to be that size. So that's how we are going with 1830. And then, of course, the documentation shows that too. But other people had been skeptical of what we were saying. That is correct. So here are the defining things. This is how the house looks today. Okay, John, it's all yours.
I've had the pleasure of being in Marilyn's house a couple of times in the past and looked at some of those things that she showed you pictures of in real life, and they're very, very fascinating, and she's got a lovely place there. What I will talk briefly about is a house that was built over 80 years after Bull House was built, but it's still a house that's almost 100 years old, and it is on, it was a summer home of Walter Briggs, and it was built on near Squirrel Road in Long Lake. Just to put it in perspective, on the right-hand side of the picture here, you see a current map, and what I've outlined in red is the area of what was Walter Briggs's estate that he called Walbree. And people ask me, well, why did he call it Walbree? I said, well, think about it. It's Walter, W-A-L, Briggs, B-R-I, Walbree Estate. But that's what it is today. Be back up in time, 1930. You can see the Briggs Development Company owned it. This is his company. He is in the real estate business in addition to being in the automotive car body business and other parts. And then before that, even in 1872, by the time the Bull House was thriving over on Wing Lake, this was a farmland for Farmer Green and so forth. The one thing I'd like to point out is on the right, look at the right-hand map, and you see the very prominent curve in Long Lake Road. Many of you, if you've ever driven it, why in the world is that road not straight? Why doesn't it come straight across from Troy and connect up in here? Well, you can see it's mainly because of the lakes. There are two little lakes there, and they couldn't build the road through the lakes, and probably because Briggs didn't really want him to cut right through the middle of his estate either, because they built that road shortly after he bought his property and built his estate there. There's a bit about his family. Walter Briggs, a nice photograph of him from the 1930 time frame, and then one much later in the late 40s, sitting in Briggs Stadium, of all places, smoking a cigar, and he was, you'll hear a little bit about his life here. Now, he was born in Ypsilanti, 1877. He began working as a railroad guy in a station, Michigan Central Railroad yard, basically. And he came into Detroit, worked for a friend of his, Everett, in making bodies for Olds cars. He then got major interest in that company and renamed it the Briggs Automotive Body Works in 1909. Built a lot of car bodies for Ford. He built himself a very large and still prominent home on Boston Boulevard in Detroit that he called Stonehenge, not Stonehenge, but Stonehenge. I kept mispronouncing it when I first did these presentations. By the way, what I'm giving you is a very reduced version of an hour and 20-minute presentation I did here back in 2014, 8 years ago, when I did the first presentation on the Briggs Estate. And it's available online if you ever want to watch an hour and 20 minutes of it, because all I'm really going to cover now is his main house, pretty much. He purchased 25% of the Briggs was now the Detroit Tigers in 1920, and that grew to 50%. And then finally, when Mr. Navin died, he got the whole thing and the stadium. And in 1924, he built the house that now made it on the National Register of Historic Places, the Walbree Estate. He had 5 children. His wife and he had 5 children. 2 daughters were born in the early 1900s. Son, Spike Briggs, or Walter II, was born a few years later. And then there were 2 daughters born in the 20s, Susan and Jane. Nice picture I picked out of a newspaper or somewhere of Walter and his wife sitting again at, I'm sure, in his well-known Briggs Stadium. He was very active in philanthropic activities in the area. I've listed a number of them there, which you would recognize, most of which still exist today. I was kind of surprised to see that he had donated the athletic buildings to Eastern Michigan University. And I also was surprised to learn that he was the one who provided the funding for the first schoolhouse at St. Hugo of the Hills, even though it was McManus that built the church and the chapel there. And he donated some of his land at his death to Sacred Heart, Academy of the Sacred Heart, which is where the school is now, Sacred Heart Academy, at the bottom part of his property. We're going to talk a bit about the description of his property. This is the layout of his estate. It's kind of a hand-drawn diagram. It exists in a 75-page booklet put together by a longtime secretary of what became the Woodcrest Lakes Association subdivision after Briggs died, but they put together a 75-page book which is going to be available soon here, again, electronic form as a PDF on the library's website. But there's lots of interesting information about it. You can see in this diagram now, though, that maybe this will work. Not too good. Anyway, you see that famous corner there of Squirrel Road and Long Lake Road in the lower right. You see a driveway, shaded darker, goes into his estate house, which is right in the middle of the picture. And then the dotted line is what's there now called Walbury Road. Goes through the subdivision that was created. The two lakes, one smaller, the one on the left is a little higher than the one on the right. It's fed by a pump. When it's necessary to raise the level of the lake, a deep well pump is used to pump water into that Briggs had put in. To put in water into that lake, it runs over a spillway into the larger lake on the right-hand side, and then there's a dam there that keeps the water at the level they want it in the subdivision. And from there, it flows over the dam and out into Bay Lake, and you all know where Bay Lake is on the Long Lake Road. There are a number of buildings in that property that I'm not going to talk about. There's the stable, the greenhouse, the boathouse, the ice house, the pump house, the stable master's house, the gatehouse, and the pool house. Almost every one of those buildings still exists today, but they're not in the National Register. Just Walbury's hunting lodge, his main house is the one that's on the registry. But my big presentation, I cover all those places. So if you want to see about all of them, you can pull that up and watch it on your computer. This is an aerial view of the property today that is called Woodcrest Lakes Residential Association. For the two lakes show up there fairly prominently, and there's that famous Long Lake Road curve. This is, a 2020 photograph. I will show you a couple of comparative photographs. I'll show you what was photographed in 1925 in a magazine called The Afterglow, which was fortunately, some of you have looked at The Afterglow online too. That's another thing that's available at the library and on the Historical Society's website. It's a three-year publication, monthly magazine, and they would often feature a prominent home that was being built or just had been built or in the area. And it featured the Walter Briggs estate in their May 1925 issue. There's a photograph of the house. I like this photograph because it shows what the land was pretty much like out here. It wasn't a gigantic forested area. This would have been farmland. It had all been cleared. My late wife would have called that sun-baked acres. There were no trees to speak of in these lots. They were just maybe a few. Marilyn had a tree. She had old oak on hers, but there was nothing much around that house in the way of trees when Briggs built it in the late 20s. Today it looks like this. It is, but before the current owner bought it, Dr. McKenzie, it was shielded from view by about 5 or 6 huge spruce trees that were between Walbury Road and his house. So the new owner knew. He's been an owner for like 8 years. Excuse me. Took those big trees down and restored it to look a little bit more like it looked in the 20s. The rear of the house in 1930 looked, as you see here, again. And today, I didn't get the exact setting for my picture that I took of it, but you get an idea of what it looks like today with these pictures I took like in 2014, I think. They have a beautiful infinity pool there now, which wasn't there when Briggs had. Briggs had a nice pool, but his pool house was a couple lots, a little down the road from it, and that Olympic-sized pool that Briggs had been turned into a house now. The pool's still there. House was built around it. Some interior shots you might be interested in seeing. This is from the 1925 Afterglow magazine picture of the Great Hall. This is really the most stunning feature to me of the house, where the Briggs did a lot of entertaining. Briggs did a lot of work for Ford Motor Company, and he had a lot of occasions to bring the company executives out to his hunting lodge, he called it, and entertain there. This was a huge hall, still there, huge day, with a huge fireplace. And what really is most spectacular about it is the balcony. It's on the right-hand side. The balcony goes around three sides, not completely around three sides, but wraps around, and it's not supported from below. It's hung from the rafters. It's hung by steel rods that you can see kind of protruding from the balcony, and it holds the balcony up, suspended from the trusswork. The chandelier is the original, in this picture, of course, the original chandelier that has been replaced by the current owner, but it's been reused. That chandelier now appears in their balcony, but maybe I have a picture of it. I'm not quite sure. But today, the room looks like this. I tried to get it in the same orientation, or very similar orientation to the 1926 picture. The chandelier has been replaced by a much larger crystal chandelier, and the old chandelier is put up in the balcony. But the big fireplace is still there, and all nice wood floor and everything is there. It's a huge, huge place, 40-foot ceiling. The dining room in 1924, when Briggs built it, was photographed for the Afterglow magazine. It's not a very large dining room. It's right off of the main hall. There's a glass door between the two rooms. The fireplace in the picture backs up to the big fireplace, but it's a much smaller version of it. One of the more interesting features of it was that it has a blue tile front on it. Now, this, of course, was a black and white picture, which didn't, you can't see the blue tile, but today, in there, you can see the same room. They treated the windows a little bit differently. They didn't have them covered with heavy window treatments like Mrs. Briggs did. But they do have the blue tile front on the fireplace. And a chandelier that looks more like the chandelier in the current Great Hall. The original chandelier is much like a replica of the smaller version of the one that was originally built. Now, look a little bit at the entire property. Again, shows the layout of the other buildings, which are almost all still private homes today. Walter Briggs died in 1952. I came across this full-page headline in the Detroit News, January 17th, 1952. It had a huge obituary about him, from which I learned a lot of information. When he died in 1952, some of those friends of his from Ford Motor Company, who would come out and party in his hunting lodge, 4 of them got together, Ford executives. These weren't just guys on the line. These were Ford executives, bought the estate, and they subdivided it into a subdivision with 66 lots in it. They called it Woodcrest, after the 2 lakes that are there, Woodcrest Lakes Residential Association. This is the book that, it's not a book, it's a set of loose leaf pages that are 75 pages in size that have all kinds of miscellaneous information about the history of the house and the Briggs family and things you might find interesting looking through them as the online version of the book. It's not printed again. It's not anything you can buy, but you can see it on the website of the library. That's how the lot's laid out. On top of the drawing of the original estate This is a sketch that was in that book that Carl Wiedemann, the longtime secretary, made to show where the lots were relative to where the major buildings were. And the little blue dot across the lake there was not one of the original ones. That was a 1971 edition built by Yamasaki, the architect, that he finally was able to buy a lot in the Bloomfield area and build himself a house, beautiful house. I understand it was just recently on a house walk in the area. Some of you may have seen it. I did not get in it, but I did take some pictures of it that I used in my other presentation. One of the really, really interesting things about the property, this isn't the house, now I threw this in because I just can't believe it when I think about it. Marshall Fredericks, who probably most of you know as a longtime sculptor in the Birmingham area, had his main studio down on Normandy and Woodward. He bought 4 lots from the Briggs, that was part of the Briggs estate. It contained the stable, contained the greenhouse, contained the boathouse, ice house, and pump house. And he used that property for 40 years. Walter Briggs only lived there for, 17 years. Marshall Fredericks owned the property for 40 years. And he used it for storing his molds and such for his major sculptures in the stable primarily, but also in the greenhouse. In the greenhouse, he also did work. He actually did some construction of some of his. It was an adjunct to his main studio down in Birmingham. But for 40 years, Marshall Fredericks owned 4 of those lots and 5 of the buildings and used them for his work. The works were then taken at Marshall Fredericks' death in 1998. He owned it from 58 to 98. His works ended up at Saginaw Valley University up in Saginaw. So they've got a big museum of Marshall Fredericks' works, most of which, or many of which, had been stored down here in the Briggs property when he owned it. This was a slide I put together for my longer presentation. I use it as a handout for people who are interested in being reminded of what the other buildings in the estate were. So there's a little map of the property in the middle, and then little vignettes, if you will, of the pictures of the different buildings that I'd taken around it. And again, this presentation was mainly for the main house, not for all those other buildings, but they all have a little story of their own. So with that, I think that covers, I'm sure that covers everything I prepared out of my hour and 20-minute presentation to give you a summary of what the Briggs estate was and why it made it into the National Register of Historic Places. So if there are some questions Marilyn can answer, or I can answer, we can take them now. I don't know if this mic will work or not.
We'll stay here.
Marilyn, what advantage is it to have your house historically? Are there any advantages to having your house designated a National Historic Site?
Yes. I believe, let me tell you, Wing Lake Road has been discovered, and the sharks are circling. I'm going to just tell it as it is, okay? The sharks are circling. And one of the people that called me said, "Lady, why aren't you selling your house right now? This is a home that I love, that children grew up in, that has many stories to it. Lady, sell your house now. Don't you understand? You could be rich." That's what he said to me. And he could get 3 large homes on this property. Old Oak is on 2.5, almost 3 lots on Wing Lake Road. So that's what someone said to me. And that is a continual barrage. I get mail solicitations and telephone calls all the time. I love that house, and I want someone else to love the house. It's been here. It's almost 200 years old, so we have a couple years to go for a big celebration, and that's probably about the time when I'll turn it over. And, but I want someone who will love the house and care for the house. It is a commitment, and but it's a happy place. We've had wonderful times there, and good things have happened there, as well as some of life's things. But that's one of the. It is a house that you're not going to find duplicated anyplace else, and it's really happy. Is there any other question than anyone else? Okay, for John.
We actually have a microphone if you want to be heard with your question, but again, I'm glad that you came out with the short notice we had for this meeting. And again, this will be recorded by Bloomfield Community Television, and it will be available online to be viewed either through the library's website or the Historical Society eventually. So, yes, wait, a question over here. We do have one. See if you can see if this will work.
I had a question about the Walter Briggs house. Who owns it now, and is there any active work being done to like preserve the building?
The house is owned now by Dr. Jim McKenzie and his wife Olga. He has owned it since about 2014, and they have tried their best to undo some of the things, like Marilyn said, undo some of the improvements that people had put into it over the prior decades. So it's not exactly like it was in 1924, but it's a lot closer than what it was when he bought it. And they try to keep it in a fashion that is representative of that period. And so they've been very active, and he again hired a professional to put his application together like Marilyn did. Yes?
I still want an answer to, are there advantages to have your house designated a historical site, or are there disadvantages?
You know, like tax advantages and that sort of thing? I don't believe there's any tax advantage, Marilyn. You're not even restricted from doing more to it. If you want to change it, you can change it. But
Well, you can change the interior, but not the exterior of the
well,
house.
if you've changed the exterior, then it's no longer on the registry.
Well, yes, but that's what they say, that it could remain on the register. But it has I think it has a certain panache to owning a historic home, and to have uncovered taken away, just like John's saying, so many of the improvements and getting back to the essence of the house.
Since it was farmland, I had heard something about they grew the grass there for Briggs Stadium. Was it?
I have not come across that story. It could be. I'd like to know that, but I did not know that. I had not come across that in my research. The question was about the grass for Briggs Stadium grown on that property. Could have been, but I've never noticed it. Yes.
I have a question about the old oak house.
Yes.
When you were sort of going through and bringing it back to the original state, was there anything really like interesting or surprising that you found that was like fun to find out about the house?
Just about everything. When we remodeled the kitchen and tried to get it, we found there had been a cupboard there, and in the cupboard we had found some things. But what is interesting is we also saw a little niche in the wall where you can see the construction of the house. That the house is it is the outside, it is lap-sided shingle or shakes. Okay, it is. There is no insulation, and we could see, and I have put a little plexiglass plate over that, so that when people come into the house, they can see what the construction of the house is. Also, we have gone through layers of wallpaper. I also brought things that, if anyone were interested in their own homes, of going through layers of wallpaper, layers of paint. I have shards that come up into the backyard every spring little shards of, little pieces of china or bottles, and I brought some of those too for people in case they wanted to see what comes up every year. And then I talked to Rich Stamps and to whomever else was in archaeology at the time, and we talked about how it substantiated the age of the house, because I found pieces of, for some of you may know, gaudy Dutch pottery. It's a site where I was gardening, and it must have been the site of one of the dumps, where did people put broken bottles? Where did they put something that didn't work anymore? These are treasures that we found on our property. Joel.
Maybe a question for both of you. You mentioned that Wing might have, you speculate that Augustus Wing might have gone to New York to recruit people from New York. So almost like he was the Chamber of Commerce. But I was just wondering if either of you know where Wing lived after,
Go
You
ahead.
know,
Go
too, Marilyn,
ahead.
right? He went to Monroe, my
Yeah.
hometown. He went down to Monroe, Michigan, and lived there for the rest of his life. He's buried in Monroe, in the old cemetery in Monroe, and he was quite a prominent citizen of the city of Monroe, right?
Right.
As far as uncovering things, just a comment on the Briggs property, a couple small things.
John also helped with a lot of, helped me too with a lot of things. John is our go-to person here at the Historical Society. He's wonderful, and Joel too, and his wife.
One of the things that was they discovered, maybe it was known, I'm not sure, but they discovered and now know that the Briggs cooled their house with water from the lake that they pumped up through the pump house down by the greenhouse underground into circulated it through portions of the house, so that they actually had, quote, air conditioning. It was more like water conditioning, I guess, of the house back in the day.
Yeah.
Oh, Dave's got a question. Speak up, Dave.
This is a little unfair, but Gabrielle, Marilyn's daughter, is here. What was it like growing up in a house that old as a kid?
I didn't think it was old.
You know, that's kind of all I knew. It was kind of interesting because we moved from a very, very modern house. When I was a young child, we lived in Lafayette Park in a Mies van der Rohe townhouse, so it was very, very, it was like extremes, you know, a whole glass house. And then we moved. It was very fun because when we moved, we had this huge backyard, and, you know, we could run around, and we had the lake. It was fun. I got married there. So my wedding was there too.
Did you ever crawl into that big oven?
No. No. Yeah, it was cool.
We were told that the children played hide and seek from the previous families. A lot of children played hide and seek and actually got themselves up where the fireplace is and got up there. It sounds really dangerous, and I'm glad my children
No,
didn't do
I didn't do
As
that.
far as you know.
Do you get to put a plate or something on your house to say it is a historic house?
Well, we have a state of Michigan heritage house plate for the house. We are hoping to get a monument very soon for a marker for the house. And what I would like to do when we get the marker is to invite you to come to a party to celebrate getting the marker and everything. For me, I want people to know. I think people in our neighborhood don't understand or don't know about the house, and I want people in Bloomfield Township to know that the house is there. When my husband was alive, we used to have great parties out on the lawn, and I want to have another one and invite you all to come and admire the marker, but also then to see the house. So will be, I hope to see you all this spring, okay?
It's my understanding that they don't give you a marker. You have to buy your own marker, but you're allowed to put it up if you are on the registry.
So, but I think it's important to know about the history of the house. And part of they ask you many questions now that that they never previously asked. But what significance does it have in your neighborhood? Well, there is a lot of significance because it's part of the history of the settlement of Bloomfield Township by about people coming from New York State and building their homes and their lives in Michigan. So that's part of it, and it breaks my heart every time I see an older home go down. Just to me, it's for no reason, that they just didn't understand that they were connected to the land in some way. And maybe if you live in even a modern home or an apartment or in a subdivision, what I have done, like I mentioned, in the spring when the ground is soft, their shards come up in the soil. You never know what you'll find even where you live, because it was farmland, and who knows what happened there. And be alert and look and recognize. Just be aware of something else that might have preceded you there. That's what I feel very sad when I see these homes going down, of Bloomfield Township losing some of their historic homes.
In my subdivision, or where I live, in my yard, I've found lots of glacial erratica, stones that were brought down from Canada and left in the ground for me to run into when I'm trying to plant my bushes and things. So they're really old.
Okay. Is there any other questions? Well, hope to see you.
Thank you all for coming.